Good morning. I have Senator Black with us today. What's been in the news recently is these protests in Iran, and the kind of the rhetoric that's coming out of both the Trump administration as well as people within the Israeli government, which is very interesting, and as well some of the comments from the Iranian government as well. There's a lot to catch up on because this is pretty much has started a little after Christmas, and it's kind of trickled on to today, where it seems like it has kind of dissipated, and there's a lot to catch up on. So I want to pass it to Senator Black to start us off. Good morning.
Good morning, Morgan. Well, we're in the process of watching an enormous tragedy unfold for people in Iran. Unnecessary, as these things often are. What we have is, if you go back to this 12-day war where Israel and the United States launched a sort of an unprovoked attack against Iran and killed a great number of people, over 1,000 killed, almost 6,000 wounded. Assassinations where Mossad had managed to target great number of Iranian officials, military officers, scientists, and they just went out and just mercilessly slaughtered them. And then the United States followed up. We bombed and destroyed a more limited list of targets. So in any event, when that happened, it was a tremendous victory for Israel. They had managed to very much infiltrate the Iranian population, to put Mossad agents really throughout the country, and so it left this image that somehow Israel had achieved a great deal, and the United States was sort of crowing about how we had, ended the nuclear program and so forth. Well, we report on the show the actions that Iran had taken, and they very promptly went out. They identified a great number of spies in their midst, executed a bunch of them. We don't know the exact numbers, but I suspect that they were very tough in what they did. The thing that was quite visible that they did is they had a large number of Afghan immigrants who had crossed the border principally for economic reasons to come into Iran, people who had no loyalty whatsoever to Iran, to their culture and that sort of thing. And the shock of the 12-day war was sufficient that the Iranian government had the power, the wherewithal to go ahead and to force the Afghan migrants out of the country. 1.5 million people were removed from the country in a fairly short order, which tells you that that there was a great deal of political power behind that movement. Now, then that brings us to this current event where I think the Israeli and the American intelligence agencies greatly failed to recognize the political will that was apparent by the Iranian government in being able to crack down on potential spy networks. And so it seems highly likely that now this latest event was triggered initially by a tremendous burst of inflation in Iran, which caused a lot of angst among the public because people were trying to make ends meet, and and it, the protest started off as a protest against the inflation and the economy. I'm just guessing, knowing the way that Mossad operates and knowing the way intelligence organizations operate historically. My guess is that Israel flooded Iran with fake currency. You'll recall that this is what happened to the colonies during the American Revolution, where the British ran a very massive, very skillful operation where they counterfeited the currency, which was called the Continental, and they flooded the states, colonies with this fake currency, and they caused enormous economic disruption within the emerging United States, and it was so bad that by the end of the Revolutionary War, there was a common saying that, this is not worth a continental. In other words, that's the continental currency was the most worthless thing that you could find. The thing that caused that inflation, of course, war does cause inflation, but what really was at the heart of it was the British undercover agents creating the counterfeit currency and flooding the market. And if you print more currency, you get more inflation. It's fairly simple. So I would say that the Israelis almost certainly flooded Iran with counterfeit currency. There's nothing in print to support that, but a simple logic. So there was this burst of enormous inflation. There has been inflation in the past. And then what happened? I think Israeli Mossad has had such shocking victories, and they have been so unbridled by their ability to just kill at will and to kill mercilessly that they overplayed their hand. There was just this fantastic arrogance on their part to where they began to brag that they had Mossad agents operating all through the country of Iran, and that all of these protesters, they're going shoulder to shoulder with Mossad agents. Now, I'm sure that made Mossad feel like big shots, maybe made some of the CIA, who were probably involved in this too, made them feel like they're really big shots, they've got the power. The problem is, there is it has been a very genuine protest movement in Iran of people who want changes in their government. And we have a tendency in the West to think that if people want some changes in their government, it means they hate their country, they want to see it overthrown. It means that they hate their culture, they hate their people, and of course this is not true. The people in Iran who have misgivings about their government is like in this country. We have right now we have a Republican presidency. There are Democrats who despise the presidency. Doesn't necessarily mean that all Democrats just want to overthrow the country and want to kill everybody. it means that they want to bring about change, and vice versa, Republican, Democrats. We have difficulty grasping this as Westerners. We tend to think of foreigners as having a different a different way of reasoning about things, and it's just a very foolish concept that we have. But in any event, so you have these protests. The economic protests grew rapidly, certainly with the inspiration of Mossad agents, and for a while there was some question of what the outcome would be, but the Iranian forces, the clerical establishment, finally brought down the club, and now there were quite a number of security personnel who were killed. The official numbers talk about 300. Now, for 300 soldiers, police, and so forth to be killed suggests that the Mossad agents were able to funnel arms and equipment and perhaps organized fighters into areas of Iran. And we have worked on nurturing groups to be ready to invade Iran. We've done that in the past. The CIA has done it. But in any event, you had 300 Iranian security officials killed, and in response, the Iranian security used live fire against crowds of protesters, and once they did, apparently at least a couple of thousand Iranian protesters were killed, and when that happened, that has put an end to the uprising. And now we had of course the Israelis, and then President Trump, encouraging people to take to the streets and all of this stuff, and help is on the way. We said that. Well, help is not on the way, and it's just a shame that we were willing to take enormous risks with the lives of people that we care nothing about, Iranian protesters. We don't give a hoot about them. We don't care whether they live, whether they die, whether their children die. That's just the way it is. Anyway, it's been a very sad episode and tremendous setback for Israel and for the United States also.
Yeah, I think it's very important that you made that correction and setting the stage prior to just after Christmas. This 12-day war does play a very important part in understanding the full story of what's truly going on, especially with how some of the Iranian citizens feel. We had discussed this in length, probably I think backstage last week. There's this documentary. It's a very good documentary called Iran: The Last Game, where it speaks to kind of the history of what led to the paranoia in people in Iran specifically to Western influence and intelligence operations that happen in their country. So they're very perceptible, and they are against that sort of action. I think that's very important to add to the story as well, given kind of the psychological operation that we saw Mossad and American leaders taking. I'll add this kind of tweet to the screen right now, which was from Mike Pompeo on January 2nd, that that at the very end it says Happy New Year to every Iranian in the streets, also every Mossad agent walking beside them. So there was this very blatant, explicit mention that Mossad was interlinked into these operations. We have
the arrogance, Morgan, the arrogance of the of Israeli intelligence is just breathtaking. And you know, if I and I certainly have never taken any position for or against the Iranian government, for or against the people who want to bring about change. I'm just an observer in what's going on, but I have to say, if let's say that I had favored change in the government or something like that, the last thing in the world that I would want is, you know, if I were heading up some organization in Iran and I had managed to bring out hundreds of thousands of people in hopes of bringing about change, the last thing in the world that I would want is to have the Israelis, you know, out there touting, saying, "Oh yeah, we got our spies all over the place in the midst of these protesters, and we've got Mossad agents who want to destroy your country, destroy your culture, destroy your institutions, destroy your economy. They're with you." I mean, I would just say, "Oh my gosh, why did you do that?"
Yeah. A part of me was, we had speculated last week that it seemed like that was also a psychological operation its own for the Iranian government to kind of take violent action. That's kind of what I speculated. But there was this report in, let's see, do I have it on the screen? Yes, by TRT World, where Iran summons a lot of the European ambassadors to watch some of the instances that they caught on film of these so-called protesters. I can play a little bit of it here. Let's see. Yeah, I got it muted. It's just kind of like a catchy music. It doesn't have any audio, but it captures video of people, civilians, with weapons, shooting, I would presume, at the security guards and armed officials.
Oh, yeah.
And so they asked for the European officials to go and take that back to their leaders to try and retract some of the narrative building that had been taking place of Iran's, you know, murdering protesters, where these are more akin to riots. And I thought that was very, very interesting. And it didn't make it into the news other than, you know, this TRT World article.
Sure. Well, you know, Morgan, there is something that occurs in a revolution, or let's just call this a revolutionary event, where if one side is able to get the better of things and to kill large numbers of the opposition leadership, it brings about a change in the nation. And you know, we saw this during the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia back in 1917, where you had a government that was, you know, that loved their people, that was bounded by morality and so forth, and all of a sudden you have this takedown by these extraordinarily radical people, but they were able to kill people at will, and it brought about just one of the most terrible cultural changes in the history of all mankind, which was this Bolshevik Marxist revolution. And these things happen, and And it's important for people who study foreign affairs to recognize that that it does bring about this transformation. I worry a little bit because we have dispatched an American carrier battle group.
Yeah, we'll put on the screen just so you know what's this is just a picture from Fox News about the military presence in the Middle East. I just want to add that so you kind of know what's on the screen while you continue to talk about it.
Yeah, and there's this talk that, well, this is to provide President Trump military options. We're going to move all this stuff there to create options. I wish we didn't create options. I wish we would not bring ourselves closer and closer to a hair trigger all the time. One thing that I worry about is the people who have taken power now in Iran are the people who are the most fiercely aggressive. These are the people who have emerged within the Iranian government hierarchy are the people who have said, we're going to crush this, and this is existential. We are going to either live or die based on how aggressive we are. And what we need to be aware of is that during the 12-day war, when Iran responded to the attacks on them, they did it in a pro forma fashion where they fired a bunch of drones, and then they notified the United States. The United States is able to shoot them all down, and nobody's hurt. But it made them feel like we're doing something. I'm not at all confident that that scenario is going to play out the next time. And I worry, because I spent 32 years in uniform, wearing the Marine Corps uniform and then the uniform of an Army JAG officer. And I've served aboard aircraft carriers a number of times. These big carriers, big carrier will have 4,000 or 5,000 people on it, if Iran were to swarm one American carrier with a large number of hypersonic missiles, and just fire everything they've got in 1 or 2, 3 quick successions, it's possible that they could light fire to one of these carriers, and with tremendous loss of life. We can't just presume that won't happen. Partly it doesn't happen because there's always the threat that we have a nuclear response and that kind of thing. But we just need to recognize that the people who have emerged right now these are not no nonsense people. And so, the idea that we're just going to sort of, put a stick in the eye of the Iranians and buzz around doing some military stuff. Let's just use some discretion, some caution, because we need to think about our military people. I think we're a little overconfident. We had such a tremendous military action in Venezuela. Whatever you think about it, it was done to perfection. I wouldn't count on that in the future. And I think when you're talking about a larger traditional kind of military action, we really run the risk of having Americans who are shot down or who are captured in the process, and it's very possible that they might just be taken out and hanged for invading the country of Iran. So we need to back off. We need to have some cooler heads prevail. We need to stop building up massively to create military option. At least that's my thought about it, Morgan.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And I think one also is we're almost like a hair trigger away always to instigating another world war. What's with Iran is their alliance with Russia, given it's not a military alliance, but they do have an alliance. And we keep kind of inching closer towards, a conflict with another nuclear power. Given, what we did in Venezuela, there was a very close connection with, China. And that is kind of where we're pivoting to, given Hegseth's Quantico visit. He, boastfully said out loud, as that's what we're pivoting to, is threats within our hemisphere and with China, is this constant acceleration towards what I don't think the American people fully understand in going towards a conflict with another nuclear nation. There really is no winning or losing at that point. It's a very dangerous, dangerous game. And I think that is kind of what we keep accelerating towards. Iran it's very integral in the part of BRICS as well, with their oil. And it's very alarming that we keep engaging these actors on the stage that are very not a make or break partner in BRICS, but we're kind of moving up the level of importance. And I think that plays a major role in this. I know Mossad has their hands all over this, and I think that it serves them a benefit to have this regime overthrown or government overthrown. But it also would serve a purpose for the overall dismantling of this excessive BRICS, which is, gaining more people. I think it has 2/3 of the world's population. They are trying to find ways against Western sanctions, which gives us, the hegemonic power right now. But if they succeed in that, that will kind of really lessen our power on the world stage and how we are able to kind of get what we want, and how we have been doing. So I think that's also a very important aspect to remember here, is this very dangerous acceleration towards a nuclear conflict through proxy nations.
Yeah, these sanctions are they're very nasty things, because we essentially impose naval blockades on nations, and then we declare, look how they've failed. Their economies don't work because they're corrupt and this and that. But if you're blockaded, your economy is going to fail. It's just that simple. So we use the failure of the economy after we sanction it as a justification for why we should be able to overthrow the government. Mm-hmm. And we've done this with Cuba. We did it with Venezuela. We've done it with Iran. So many places. I mean, we're sanctioning everybody on the planet right now, and it's just a very unhealthy thing, because it sort of provides its own provocation towards war. You sanction, and then you criticize the country because they're having economic difficulties that you created. And now that's not to say that some of these countries wouldn't have economic difficulties on their own, because maybe their government deserves to be changed. Maybe it's not good, but nobody can tell. Once sanctions are on, you look at Syria. Syria When we attacked them initially in 2011, they had a beautifully balanced economy. They had a nice export economy, nice imports. They were industrialized. They had agriculture. It was really a perfectly balanced place. The country was very harmonious. Um, People were very, very happy. They weren't rich, but they were quietly prosperous. And we went in and we began with the sanctions and all of this and created more and more stress. And then finally, I mean, here you had 2/3 of the world, the entire world's industrial and military might going after one little country of 23 million people. And at the end of 13 years of unremitting war, blockades, sanctions, outright theft, occupation, finally the country just disintegrated. But it didn't disintegrate because people didn't like the government. It disintegrated because people had been starved to death by the West.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had been beheaded by the West. They had been raped by the West. I'm not saying there were a couple of little things. I'm saying tens of thousands of people were beheaded by Western agents. Hundreds of thousands of Syrian women were raped by Al-Qaeda jihadists, the people who we've now put in power there. And it shows the inner strength, the moral strength of that country, of Syria, that it was able to hold itself together for as long as it did. But it just shows that any country, if it's blockaded long enough, it can be brought down. But I see no virtue whatsoever in doing that to any country or to any people. It's cruel. It's immoral to do that to people. And to what purpose? What earthly thing do we gain from all of the bloodshed and the destruction that we keep imposing around the world?
Yes, the Lancet, they did a study and they concluded that the U.S. sanctions ultimately end in, you're talking civilians. You're not talking about their leaders or the people that we deem to be, holding account to why we're putting these sanctions on them in the first place. Around 500,000 people die every year from starvation or lack of access to medical care that the U.S. government is sanctioning from a particular foreign country. I think we can all remember, of course, it was before I was able to even have a voice in politics, but Madeleine Albright basically saying that she thought it was just necessary for the sanctions that we put on Iraq that ultimately led to 500,000 children dying of starvation. I don't know if you remember that particular interview where she was directly asked about that, and she said, it was a good thing, it was a necessary thing. So it's a known thing that we're ultimately subjecting a lot of these civilians to starvation and inability to get medical access that they should have the access to. And it's besides it being immoral, it's also super costly for us. We're starting to have countries turn away from us because they don't like that we use sanction as a weapon. I think that really happened and gave a lot of countries the courage to be very vocal about this when we sanctioned Russia, and Russia was able to stand on its own 2 feet and not have their economy fall like our officials said that would happen. I think that really kind of put some wind in the sails of BRICS to show that it is possible to overcome kind of what used to be this death sentence, as you want to put it, with U.S. sanctions. Mm-hmm. So I think that is, it's a very interesting pivot that's happening. I would like to ask a question that we got in from one of the viewers. John Wayne had said, the senator is very informed, but I would like to know what the U.S. is doing to ensure that the CIA is cutting ties with Mossad. He adds, I feel like Mossad and the Israeli government are playing us like a fiddle. What's your comment on that?
It's a very good comment. Sadly, the situation we have is that American foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, is directed and dictated by Netanyahu. President Trump, I'm a supporter of Trump, I'll tell you right up front. But I am not a supporter of Netanyahu. And I think we've just got a situation where the Trump administration has basically given over U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East to Netanyahu. It's not that there isn't sometimes a little bit of give and take or a little bit of resistance, but it's not much. And sadly, I think, I suspect that deep within the bowels of the CIA, there is a whiff of morality, of right and wrong. I don't think there is within Mossad. I don't think there's the faintest whiff of morality, or basically it's just a strange operation. But I don't think the CIA. You never hear the U.S. government or the sort of the mainstream media, New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. You never hear them say the CIA assesses that thus and so is the case. They always say, well, Israeli intelligence says thus and so, or the Ukrainian intelligence gives the following assessment of what's going on the ground. What the hell have we got this monumental intelligence operation for if we then turn around and turn it all over to Mossad or to whatever you call the Ukrainian intelligence network? You never hear from our intelligence agencies never say, well, we've studied this and we recognize that what we tried to do in Iran is a total failure and we need to reevaluate what's going on. You won't hear that. All you'll hear is that Israel has now said that maybe Trump should back off a little bit and not attack. So it's almost like, well, okay, Netanyahu is giving Trump permission to pull back a little bit. It's one of the saddest things. This is not new. This is not unique to President Trump. I remember seeing something where President Reagan was publicly humiliated on public television by an Israeli interested individual, because he had gone to Germany and he had laid a wreath on a tomb of some SS officers. And of course, we're supposed to believe that all SS officers were involved in the Holocaust, which is nonsense. SS was a huge part of the German army, and they're very much like the U.S. Marine Corps. They're just very, very hard, very tough group. But in any event, Reagan was publicly humiliated and had to just simply accept it on TV. I remember that, thinking how shocking that was, but it just shows the dominance of the financial regime. And so I wish it were not so. I wish that the CIA were able to operate more independently and give their earnest assessment of the way things are. I think they probably would be more balanced if they were allowed to make an independent assessment that might conflict with the Israeli assessment. But
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important assessment to add to the, you're saying that the mainstream media, they don't kind of boost the, the CIA lines, but there was the 2025 CIA threat assessment that we've spoken about on the show, but on the screen, that would actually, at the time, if we had our media pushing this, and instead of the Israeli intelligence line that they kept pushing, that got us into the 12-day war, where our own threat assessment from the CIA, stated very clearly that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. That was kind of like the main reason why they told us that we needed to get in there. But this is our own, intelligence agencies, basically conflicting between, or having this conflicting stance with the Israeli intelligence, that ultimately our administration took the Israelis instead of their own, which was very interesting. As well as, there are these threat assessments, or these documents that they place out. They're very telling, but they know that the mainstream media is not going to pick that up and give that to the citizens, and the citizens will rarely go on their own and read these documents. But they are very telling. It kind of where the U.S. stands on these positions. I would encourage people to look at the threat assessment, as it went into multiple different regions. I think the next thing that comes to mind is the DHS assessment on drug trafficking. That was a really big one that mainstream media didn't tell you about, but it really has. It puts forth, what are the major cartels the U.S. is after, what kind of cartels they have linked to, how these cartels, they're really deemed international criminal agencies. They don't have a home or a country or a constitution they subscribe to. They're an international network. Very, very interesting to kind of have that put into the conversation versus kind of what is our mainstream media pushes. So I thought that would be a very interesting note to end on. I know that we're kind of coming to the end of the show, so I want to pass it to you, Senator, for concluding remarks.
Well, I think at this point we're going to watch and see how things unfold. I'm guessing, and maybe this is a little bit hopeful, that that we will back off and allow Iran to get back to things as normal. One other thing that we hadn't touched on is that there seems to be great nervousness among the Arab countries over what Mossad and the CIA are doing to Iran. I think it's beginning to make people on the Arab street very nervous that Mossad could just go in and take down whoever they want and kill anybody they want, and it's becoming awkward for countries that, as brutal as the Saudis are. I think there's a little bit of nervousness that this doesn't have a good look to Muslims when they see this happening to Iran, even though you have the difference of Sunni versus Shia Muslims. But at a certain point, I think people are just getting very nervous to see one country after the other. And of course, there was a time going all the way back to right after 9/11, where we know from the Supreme Allied Commander, Wesley Clark, that the Pentagon had been ordered to develop plans to take down 7 countries in 5 years. Of course, it's taken much longer, but Iran is number 7 on the list, and there's just sort of this this momentum. Get it done, get it done. You know, close the book, and you've knocked out the last one. But it is interesting that there's now some backlash from the Arab countries. There's nervousness that this has been a bridge too far, and that Iran is going to emerge more powerful than before from this event. So we'll see what happens next. It's all unfolding.
I agree. Those are good remarks. I would, also add, always continue to use your voice, and if you don't agree with how your government is acting on the world stage, definitely make that known. Call your reps, and then also be a leader yourself. So I think that's a good way to end it. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this Saturday for Focus on the News, and join us next week. Have a good one. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Morgan.